went to medical school, was in the Air Force. We had peace with honor. I got stranded in North Carolina without a job after expecting to go into Vietnam. I tried out my hand at research, liked it, spent 27 years at Duke involved in neurology research and early genetics research. In 1997, after 27 years at Duke, I went to GlaxoSmithKline, where I was in the research and development executive, overseeing a unit called genetics research. 2007, I retired and came back to Duke and started under the auspices of the incubation group of the business school, where I now reside, to start an experiment in how to use commercial entities in a focused and successful way. I learned two things over the time in Glaxo and the time in the university. In the major big organization, the decisions are usually portfolio decisions from the top, which are so far removed from the reality of what's going on that many of them are bad. Made by people who know very little about the science, very little about all the arguments, perhaps even based on a single presentation by the wrong person. In academia, where you're really focused and you know everything inside and out, you don't have any money. And what people are trying to do is to bridge that gap, but there's no way that the academic intellectual process can be introduced into a large company. So people started talking about virtual companies. And I decided long ago, when we started to experiment with those in GlaxoSmithKline, that that's exactly what I would do if I had a chance to do it. Focused, highly focused companies that did the next steps or interweaved so that you had a congruence of companies and everybody wasn't trying to administer it from the top. I have 3 startup companies that people already know about. One of them is called Cabernet. I'm a wine lover. To keep the companies straight, I'm naming all the companies after red wines. So Cabernet is strictly consultation time in which we do pharmacogenetic consultations for large companies, pharma companies, and we also do help them with their project management. That is a service company. We own no IP, and it allows us to continue to practice on a pipeline. Okay? Now, during the development of the companion diagnostics comes along, and of course the big pharma doesn't know how to handle those. And so what we have established is a for-profit company called Shiraz Pharmaceuticals, and that will take the companion diagnostics from the companies that we're working for or from wherever else they come from, and to develop them in the context of drug development. The third company is Zinfandel. We have a test that we developed and we have the IP on that allows us to predict at certain ages, based on genotypes that we can measure, the risk of developing signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease in the next 5 to 7 years, depending on your age. It's a highly dangerous test to put on any kind of market, and by holding the IP, we can withhold it from a market. What we really want to do is that we now have the opportunity to do a prevention study. If indeed we're right and we can predict that, then we can get high risk and low risk people in a study and look at the positive effect of a drug on the high risk people, delaying the onset, and in the low risk where we wouldn't expect to see an onset. If we did see some, we would have what's called the negative predictive value. So we would validate a test the right way, take 5 years to do it, and at the end we'd probably even have a better way of analyzing it. But what we get out of it is validation of a test and a prevention drug study in the same module. And this was presented to the VGDX meetings of the FDA, and after a process of debate and conversation, this was accepted as a reasonable scientific and medical way to do a prevention study. Well, the benefits when you use it correctly allows you to do, for instance, by use of this predictive test, it's not a diagnostic, it's a predictive test, it allows us to shrink the number of people in the study. So instead of the study having to be 50,000 people over a 20-year period, we're talking about 3,000 to 5,000 people in a 5-year period. The first step in order to commercialize it, you need a good drug, and probably that's going to be the resurrection of a different drug that's been out there for years and years, because the FDA is not going to let you do prevention studies, giving a drug to normal people if it's unsafe. It is in line with a lot of what people are talking about but not really doing yet, is looking at drugs that have demonstrable value. They're no longer on patent, and they may not even be currently made. But in fact, those kinds of drugs do exist, and they have certain properties, and if they're involved in the mechanism of understanding the way the disease works, be it Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, whatever disease, then these are kinds of things that could be used, somewhat on a low dose.